Yeah, so today we're going to focus just on stimulants, cocaine, amphetamine, and then we'll switch over at some point to talk about caffeine and nicotine, right? So there are those things to think about as well. This is going to be different than what we talked about in sort of the previous week when we talked about opioids. People were not taking opioids to get kind of amped up, right? They were taking opioids for a different reason and other things. So the effects are going to be there. All right. So again, these guys are psychomotor stimulants. Basically, the sort of observable effects of all of these are going to be pretty similar, right? Whether it's amphetamine or cocaine, you're going to have a similar effect. You're going to have increased alertness, heightened arousal, behavioral excitement, right? These are all things that stimulants do. Cocaine comes from a shrub in South America. Folks have been chewing this for a really long time, right? I mean, this is something that people do. I don't know, there's a nice map of parts of South America, right? For those of you interested in maps. I don't think that's that important. So this is a guy who, if you see somebody in West Virginia like this, it's probably not cocaine, right? It's probably something else. If they're in South America, then it's probably cocaine, right? What's really kind of, I love this, you know, like the Catholic Church, they decided like, hey, people probably shouldn't chew cocaine. Until they realized, well, man, those guys aren't nearly as productive when they're not on the cocaine. So maybe we should just let them do that for a while, because what you can do when you're on cocaine is work for a really long period of time with very little food. And this is a great thing to do if you are a miner, if you are working at a high altitude, or if there's someone like in charge of your labor who's not paying you. They might think that's a great thing for you to be able to do, right? I wouldn't recommend it. And again, let's see, Sigmund Freud, everybody loves Sigmund Freud, right? How many of you have a Freud tattoo? No, no one? Anybody thought about it? No, that's good. You should get somebody better, like Carl Jung or no, that's even worse. Nobody's a fan. So Sigmund Freud was actually a huge fan of cocaine, and especially its non-addictive properties. It's to know about those, right? Yeah, those don't exist. So cocaine, very popular, used in a ton of medications. Coca-Cola, that's how it got its name. Coca and the cola plants. Right? Gave you the cocaine and the caffeine there. They do not put cocaine, at least intentionally anymore, in Coca-Cola. There might be some accidental contaminations, I don't know. Jason, are you a Coca-Cola fan?
Not really.
Not really? Yeah.
They should put it in Coke Zero.
You should put it in Coke Zero. Yeah, that'd sell that. Cocaine was, or Coca-Cola was actually used as an alternative to alcohol during that great temperance movement. The ideal brain tonic, I love that advertisement. Coca-Cola.
For the summer and winter.
For the summer and yeah. Take it in the summer, you get real productive, you know, over fields, whatever people do. In the summer, in the winter, I get you through the blues, right? Nothing will get you through seasonal affective disorder like a good shot of cocaine. That's an accurate story, right, Jason? I mean, you know this. I mean, we don't recommend it. They don't prescribe cocaine for that. Of course, then right around the early 1900s, you guys know about that, right? Taft, President Taft. Anybody from Ohio? You guys are big Taft fans, right?
Stuck in a bathtub? Yeah.
He is the one who got stuck in the bathtub.
Embarrassing.
It is embarrassing.
I'll never be known for it.
Like your guy got stuck
That's
in the
literally the
bathtub.
only thing I know about him.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And he had buttons printed up that said the president will be late because he was never on time. So,
Stuck in a bathtub.
yeah. So you had the Narcotics Act. We know about that. Again, you can take cocaine through injection or smoking. The sort of big deal about crack, was its sort of low cost, right? One of the big deterrents for any drug is going to be the cost of that, right? It's going to cost. And anytime someone can develop a way to present a drug in a more economical fashion, you're going to see a spike in the use of that particular drug. And when crack came around, because it was so cheap, it was compared to other drugs that were on the market, you saw a big spike in its use.
Is there any difference between crack and powder cocaine in the effects?
Yes and no, right? So like, no, it's cocaine,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't really matter how you get it. There is a difference in like onset and sort of, and actually that's actually a great question. And we can sort of skip ahead to that because it's really, you guys don't really, all these fun images. But it's about absorption rates, right? So here is, Jessica, this graph actually answers your question. It shows sort of over the course of the time how much concentration of cocaine is in the blood, right, through different routes, whether that's IV, smoked, intranasal, or oral, and you can kind of see the spikes and the onset there. So with like IV or smoking, you get a high sooner, and you get like a much higher peak of the concentration. It washes out a little faster for IV than if you snort that, it takes a little longer. So in terms of what it's actually doing biochemically, there's no difference. But in terms of its sort of the way you feel and how quickly that onset is, there can be a difference there.
When
But
you
it-
smoke crack, right?
Yes.
What makes it crack and not cocaine?
Right.
But you add other stuff to it, right?
Yeah, so there's, that's a really detailed, no.
Specifically, what do I need to add?
Yeah, so.
I got a guy, don't worry.
I'm
He
sure
was
we're-
just telling me about crack the other day, and so I have like a picture in my head now. And
Yeah,
so now I
the reason
can
they call it crack
answer
is
the
because of the
question.
noise it makes when you heat it,
Hmm.
right? So it kind of, you didn't know that, right? It kind of cracks and.
Pop rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, she's
Yeah.
the one.
There you go. But the problem with cocaine when you like get it is it's not actually heat stable. You can't smoke it, right? So what you have to do, you have to put it in water. You have to put some other stuff in there like ammonia, and you've got to extract that and then dry it out, and then you end up with crack. So there you go, right? It's like rock candy. No, that was a good question. Cocaine, of course, is lipid soluble, so it gets through your blood-brain barrier, not a big deal. Because it gets in your brain quickly, it's obviously going to be strongly addictive, right? Not a big deal there. Half-life on cocaine is maybe, half an hour to an hour and a half. You've broken it down, so that's a relatively short half-life. However, you can really enhance the half-life of your cocaine if you mix it with some alcohol, because one of the byproducts is cocaethylene, which is basically does the same thing that cocaine does, but it just has that longer half-life. Lots of folks who use cocaine and alcohol together for different reasons sometimes, right? Some folks who are chronic alcoholics will use cocaine so they can kind of get up where they belong. Some folks who are chronic cocaine users will use alcohol to kind of bring them down a little bit. They're just trying to dial things in there, right? And so they can get that, right operational effect. Because cocaine, obviously, it has this, again, that heightened alertness. Sometimes that gets out of hand, right? Actually, a number of folks who take cocaine, actually the vast majority of people who try cocaine won't do it again, right? Like, that was just enough that one time. And in fact, really only like 10 or 15% of people who use cocaine develop, into habitual users, and actually that's a problem for them. A lot of folks have this really bad anxiety response to cocaine, which you can imagine. I don't know if any of you have ever accidentally had 2 energy drinks at the same time, and then you sort of thought you were having a panic attack, right? So cocaine's like that, right? It's going to really just get you hyped up. Why are you looking around? Mr. Starbucks. I mean, that's almost like an energy drink, right? You know how much caffeine they put in those things? You don't, but it's a lot.
Different form though.
It's a different form.
Feel like. Yeah, it's like if you snort heroin, you're not really addicted.
I don't know if I'd take that to the clinic, but, you know, I mean, it's something to think about. So anyway, I mean, if you're dealing with someone who is using alcohol and cocaine, again, just keep in mind the half-life of that, of the effects of that cocaine are going to be around a little longer. Cocaine is actually pretty impressive because it can block the reuptake of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. Right, so it's really got action on multiple neurotransmitter systems, which is something that's sort of unique, right? It's powerful. Its biggest sort of effect is going to be, you know, on this reuptake blockage, right? So when a neurotransmitter is released, you sort of recycle that neurotransmitter. Typically, you have these, you know, transporters for dopamine, norepinephrine, whatever. They're going to just pull that back in to the cell that released it. If you block that, you leave those neurotransmitters at the synapse much longer, right? Now, we use this to our advantage, and we'll talk a lot about, you know, SSRIs later, right? You guys, I'm certain you all know at least 500 people on an SSRI, right? Because they're fairly commonly prescribed, right? And especially for folks who are working, you know, with individuals who are dealing with mental health issues. SSRIs are prescribed for just about every mental health issue you can imagine, right? They seem to work and seem to help, or at least seem to be something people do, right? Falls into one of those categories. So we use that reuptake blockage to our advantage in those cases, right? So we'll increase the, you know, sort of activity of serotonin by doing that. Cocaine does the same thing. It just blocks reuptake. But when we're blocking reuptake of multiple neurotransmitters, and when we're blocking the neurotransmitters powerful as dopamine, we're really dealing with some serious business, right?
So what would happen if the person is on an SSRI and doing cocaine?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Wow. You're going to deal with some serious problems. I mean, not that we're dealing with serious problems anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to guess most people, like on cocaine, are not going to need to take an SSRI. That's just my guess. There aren't a lot of people going in for cocaine, or, you know, cocaine users that are like, well, I'm really depressed and lethargic and just not feeling well. I think you got a little SSRI for me. I mean, that's not a typical response, right? I mean, it could be, I guess. Yeah, you're going to be dealing with a serious problem there. Serotonin syndrome is something I would be worried about, and some other things, because again, you've got effects on those multiple neurotransmitters. You're hitting some of them with 2 different drugs. I mean, it's just going to be a bad situation. You're not prescribing cocaine and SSRIs to the prison, are they?
No.
Okay.
But I mean, the guy I had the other day was talking about when he was feeling really crappy, he was going back to cocaine. But I think he was on meds at the time, like from before he felt crappy.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what that did to him.
Yeah, it's going to really, I mean, the cocaine in and of itself is going to be enough to overwhelm your neurotransmitter systems, but then you add something else on top of that. It's just gonna be, you start running into toxic effects for whatever neurotransmitter system it is. So we already talked about this. You guys understand how cocaine blocks these transporters, right? See how fast we can go through this? We're already on slide 28 of 146. Cocaine binds most strongly to that serotonin transporter. Serotonin, you know, not addictive. I don't think you worry about addiction profiles when you give people SSRIs, right? That's not something you're typically thinking about. But it is, so the serotonin effect or the norepinephrine effect are not what's really giving you the problems with cocaine. It's going to be that dopamine, right? the dopamine reuptake, blocking that can really be problematic. The other thing cocaine does on the dopamine system, so it actually kind of acts in two ways. Olivia, it doesn't just block reuptake, but it also increases these transient dopamine release things, right? So periodically you'll just get a burst of dopamine, right? And taking cocaine will increase those bursts of dopamine release. Anybody have an idea where that might happen, Jessica?
The nucleus accumbens.
Yeah, nucleus accumbens, right?
NCAA.
You had all the right letters. Well,
Yeah.
almost. So it's going to increase that kind of dopamine release there as well, which is also problematic because then that's going to just reinforce that, that addictive behavior.
Is that, are you saying that happens like just after it's out of your system or as part of?
While you're on it. Once the cocaine has been metabolized and excreted, it's not going to be doing anything. So you don't have to worry about that. There are these knockout mice that, Webbox, right? You guys know all about knockout mice. So that's going to be fun. I'll read those web boxes. We already talked about the norepinephrine transporter. Not a big deal there. Which in turn actually increases this is one of those working from multiple angles, actually increases glutamate activity, which stimulates the VTA to drop more dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, right? So again, cocaine has this multifaceted sort of action, right? Which is really pretty impressive. As a molecule, that a single molecule can have, like that particular, that much sort of widespread effect. It's not just blocking reuptake, it's blocking reuptake, it's increasing these, release. It's just really, cocaine and amphetamine, they're really kind of powerful drugs. On top of that, cocaine actually has the ability to block sodium channels, which is kind of cool. How many of you have ever used lidocaine? Nobody's going to admit to that. It's a topical anesthetic, is all it is, right? Your dentist, anybody ever been to the dentist, Novocaine?
They
Right.
put that in that like muscle relaxer, like patches,
They do.
icy stuff.
What?
Yeah, like icy hot or something.
Some of those have lidocaine in them,
Yeah,
yeah.
menthol.
Not all of them, huh?
Oh, it's menthol, the active ingredient in a lot of those.
Yeah, but some of them now have lidocaine as well. Which is, good if you're in some pain. But lidocaine is just a derivative of cocaine.
Cocaine.
So there you go, right? Do not try to dry out your icy hot and smoke it. Megan, just letting you know, that's not the way to
Got
make
plenty of
it.
that. You're gonna be covered in patches.
So basically, if you're high on cocaine, you've got that, euphoric feeling. Not a big deal. I think you guys know pretty much what's going on there. Yeah. Don't take cocaine and think you're going to be just, become some sex god or something. It doesn't really work that way. Again, you might be doing things faster, but not necessarily at a higher frequency, right? So I don't know that that's going to be helpful. Word to the wise. Just my guess. I don't know if that's think about these things. I don't know if you ever think. Do you ever think? Probably not.
About cocaine and sex, no.
Probably just me. Probably just me and I don't know, Mick Jagger or something. We're probably like the only two people thinking about this. I don't know. What are you gonna do?
John Jones.
Huh?
John Jones.
Yeah.
Is cocaine that easy to get? I'm practically speaking, for college students and things like that.
Oh God, yes.
Oh.
Jess, honey.
I don't know. I just thought they were all doing pot, not cocaine.
Doing pot.
Or Adderall, that's what I thought was good enough. I didn't know. They're on cocaine.
Well, not like all of them.
I know, but the ones that you think, okay, they're probably on something. I thought it was like Adderall. or
They're
whatever.
dabbling.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of things.
I think it's easier to get than what you probably.
It's really
I'm assuming at this point in your lives, like most of you have, again, most of you have to take possibly random drug tests, right? So you've probably moved beyond the cocaine stage in your life.
I know.
You missed that window. So there you go. Now there might be a few other things that get legalized soon, and you can try those. But I'm sorry. What? Okay. Yeah, that's usually best. But yeah, I think it's actually much easier to get drugs than what you think it is. I think it's, you could just drive down 8th Avenue with a flag, hang it out your car, and like people will jump out and have things for you. And that like 3-block stretch of Hal Greer.
Yeah.
It's like a weird 3-block stretch, right? You get past there, it's okay, you come back the other way, things are fine, but there's that 3-block stretch.
It's weird.
It is weird, isn't it? So there you go. Folks on cocaine might be a little extra aggressive. I'm thinking about now like how agitated I get when I'm in line at Kroger. I can imagine like if I was on cocaine and I was waiting behind that old guy who swears he's never used his pen at Kroger, which you've had to do for like the last 5 years, to use your debit card. I might be inclined to just run him over with my card. I don't know. Things to think about, right? Not a big deal there. Here are some of the symptoms. Obviously, if you take more, you get more severe symptoms. See, on some of these, you sort of have a U-shaped sort of situation, right? So there you go. Not a lot of sleep. Not a lot of eating. Okay. Not going to run into a lot of overweight crack addicts. Right? It's just there you go, right? Just to let you know that. They definitely have these sort of disjointed ideas, very incoherent rambling. This is actually something important for a lot of you because delusions of grandiosity, that also fits into like schizophrenic sort of symptomology, right? And sometimes it's hard to tell. If somebody comes in and you don't know, is this guy schizophrenic or is he on cocaine, right? And so one of the best things you can do is just wait it out. Put him in a room with no cocaine, come back in a few days and check on him. If he's still having these symptoms, it's probably not the cocaine.
Yeah, I feel like this could look like mania.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's hard to tell, especially if someone comes in and they say they've had a history of those sort of diagnoses and they've got a drug use history as well, and then you really are sort of confounded for a while, right? You need to kind of figure that out. So obviously you could do a drug screening. The metabolites will hang around for a while. You can check that. You could just wait them out. Again, I like the idea to just put them in a room and just stare them down for 3 days. I don't know if that's not in the DSM-5, is it? They don't teach you how. The DSM just tells you about problems. It doesn't tell you how to fix them, does it? That seems useless. That's a different. The problem is that's a different set of books, right? There's not like one book. There's one book that'll tell you what the problem is, like 500 that'll tell you how to fix it. And each of those, like those 500 books, will give you 700 different solutions.
No, they're the same or different ways. It's the same thing.
I think you just stare them down. I'm gonna write that therapy book.
Oh,
It'll be like a child's book, picture book.
Yeah.
Get it across to us.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
If you're an animal, some of you are, if you actually give animals low doses, they'll actually increase their locomotor behavior. They'll start moving around a whole bunch, and they'll do some, at least in rats, they'll do these like stereotyped behaviors, right? So they'll like continue to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? And there's not a lot of variability in that. And you'll see that in people as well. Right? Some folks who are on drugs will continue to kind of do the same thing over and over.
So could cocaine use
trigger a manic episode in the same way like an SSRI could for someone who's bipolar. So they would continue to be manic even after like the cocaine gets through their system.
I'm not certain. That's a good question. I mean, I could see where that would be a definite possibility. Again, I mean, you know, cocaine does have some similar actions to SSRIs. You're dealing with folks bipolar who already have disrupted neurotransmitter function, right? Which is problematic. That's interesting. We could try it. Somebody's volunteering for that. Right, Destiny? Just about every species who's ever been exposed to cocaine will self-administer cocaine. Tells you it's addictive, right? Humans self-administer cocaine. Let's see. Cocaine mimics your sympathetic nervous system, that activity, right? So it's going to increase your heart rate, clamp off your blood vessels, give you high blood pressure, and hyperthermia. You're going to get hot. This can be very problematic. Obviously, if you have any underlying issues, right, cardiovascular issues underneath of that, taking cocaine is going to make that worse. Even if you don't, those are not good things, right? Especially combined together, right? So it's increase your heart rate simultaneously, like clamp down on your blood vessels. That seems like a winner. That's not going to lead to like, you know, aneurysms or anything, right? It can be very problematic. And this is what can some of what can be, you know, fatal for folks who use cocaine. If you're a heavy cocaine user, you can obviously have seizures, right? Again, for overactivating your neurotransmitters, activating your system. Stroke, intracranial hemorrhage, heart failure, all kinds of things. Even if you don't have hemorrhage, because you're clamping off your blood vessels, you could still have damage to brain tissue, right? Because they're not getting supplied with the right amount of nutrients and blood flow. Especially if you do this repeatedly, right? So you know, you're just clamping off for a while, and then so everything goes back to normal, and you go back to it, and then you just, you know, back and forth like that all the time. It's going to be a bad idea. We're already talking about dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Not a big deal. You guys don't need to know about this too much. These are just different experiments, different chemicals that have been injected into different parts of the brain and what that does. It's basically all the same. I mean, the lesions are different, but obviously they're going in a different direction. Knockout mice, self-administer. I don't think you guys really need to think about this too much. It's basically just telling you that it's the dopamine transporter that's going to be really important for the addiction profile there on cocaine. Now, folks are different, right? So there are some people who, obviously we've already talked about this, right? Like most people who take any particular substance are not going to become addicted to that substance, right? In some way that's actually detrimental. They're not going to have heavy use. They're not going to have repeated use. They're going to abuse that substance. It's not going to be a problem. Why is that? Well, you know, that's kind of a big question. A lot of that's going to be related to your neurotransmitter function, whether that's synthesis, release, reuptake, right? All of these things that we've talked about, anywhere that one of these drugs can actually come in and make some changes, it's going to be different from person to person. So these are they took these rats. Some of them were highly responsive to cocaine and some were not as responsive to cocaine. And then kind of measured activity levels. Obviously, some folks have a bigger response to cocaine than others, right? There's some genetic reasons behind that. I think that's pretty normal. Not a big deal. Again, what they were looking at here is nucleus accumbens and how much dopamine was present. If they had a high response to cocaine, it took them longer to get the dopamine out of the nucleus accumbens than if they were not as responsive to cocaine, right? So you can imagine someone who has, like double the normal level of dopamine transporters, right? And you give that person cocaine, they're probably not going to get much effect out of that, right? Because the cocaine's going to work twice as hard in them as they would somebody else to get that same effect because they have twice as many dopamine transporters. Somebody who has half as many, they could really save their money and take a much lower dose of cocaine to get the same effect. So there you go, right? But nobody knows. And so you don't know. I mean, this is like a big mystery, Kyle. Like, do you have a lot of dopamine transporters or not? You don't know. One way to find out is take some cocaine and see what your response is. And if you got a big response, then, well, you probably don't have that many transporters. If it's a low response, then you probably have several. Not a big deal. They do this with humans in pet studies. They can do cocaine or methylphenidate. Anybody know what this guy is? There you go, right? You guys probably know it by some other names, like Ritalin. Yeah. Which is a little weird. You give a stimulant to somebody who's hyperactive. On the surface, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But the reason you do that is because the idea is that some part of that person's brain is not working properly to tell them not to do things, and giving that stimulant to them will sort of get that going.
Is it lower metabolic rate in prefrontal cortex?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's prefrontal cortex is where it's at. That's the part of your brain that says, hey, stupid, don't do that. Doesn't work for everybody, as you noticed. Right? So that happens. But why would you use methylphenidate in a study instead of cocaine? Yeah, right. You can't just go get people cocaine and like put them in a PET scanner, right? Like IRB things or whatever. It's getting in the way of great research. Again, Jessica, you were asking about sort of, is it different if you smoke it or inject it or snort it? Doesn't really matter. It's going to do the same thing. It's just how fast does that do it, right? And that's going to be how quickly can those dopamine transporters be blocked, right? By whatever route of administration you have. It's not a big deal. There are different dopamine receptor subtypes, and these are kind of interesting. So what folks have done is they will, and I know folks have done this because I've done this. So you'll get a rat, you'll give it a little bit of cocaine, and then what you'll do is you'll give it you'll give it like a dopamine receptor blocker, right? And so you can give it like whatever receptor subtype. You have blockers for different receptor subtypes, and then you can see like does that have an effect on its behaviors while it's on cocaine. So that's kind of interesting. If you give them a bunch of cocaine and then give them a D1 receptor blocker, locomotor behavior decreases, right? Or you don't see that big of an increase. So that says, hey, it's probably those D1 receptors that are important for that. So that's kind of interesting. D1 receptors, if you don't have those, if you have those knockout mice, they actually will not self-administer cocaine. So there you go. We should just make people who don't have D1 receptors, right? then they won't self-administer cocaine. Seems reasonable. You guys are going to have CRISPR babies, right? I don't know if you laughed because you thought it was a baby you put in the CRISPR in your refrigerator, or if like some of you laughed because you actually know what CRISPR is. Was anybody in that second category? Okay, one person. Thanks. CRISPR is like gene editing technology, right? And so odds are, hopefully none of you do, but odds are if you do have kids, it's going to be in a time when you're going to be able to maybe have some control over their genetic composition, right?
And anyone can buy a genetic kit.
Yeah. It can happen, right? Not everyone knows how to use one.
No.
I think that's a different sort of story, but you can buy them. And so, have fun all day with those. But yeah, so I don't know, right? Maybe we could start gene editing, cut out D1 receptors. I don't think you need D1 receptors, right? There's nothing, I can't think of a behavior that we would want to reinforce ever, right? That would be helpful for like, learning and memory or anything, right? That doesn't seem helpful. That's the problem, right? If you cut out somebody's D1 receptors, yeah, they're not gonna use cocaine, but then probably nothing else is going to be rewarding either, right? And then if things aren't rewarding, what do? Not them, right? Right? And the problem is if nothing is rewarding, you're not likely to do anything. And so that could really be bad. So maybe you ought to hang on to your D1 receptors, at least for a little while. You guys aren't going to get excited about medium spiny neurons, so don't worry about it. But that's where, out of the nucleus accumbens, that's where they have a lot of these D1 receptor guys. So that's pretty cool, actually. Again, we talked about anxiety when you take cocaine. I don't know if you guys have talked to anybody who's tried cocaine and they described it to you. You should do that. I think that would be helpful, right? No? Again, a small number of folks actually move to using cocaine. Most folks actually start by snorting cocaine. That seems to be like the first way that you're gonna, I know, right? So I think about this. One, I hate the smell of money, right? Like dollar bills are just, they smell dirty, right? And so I'm thinking like, do I really wanna, because that's how you have to do it. I know, because I saw it in the movie, Kyle, that you have to use a rolled up, I think, like some currency.
100. You gotta use 100.
It's gotta be 100, right? So my little George Washington I'm rolling up, it's not gonna be sufficient. Lucky if I can get an Abraham Lincoln in my pocket. My wife doesn't send me out with a lot of cash. She gives me these cards that I think, well, I have access to like tens of thousands of dollars, right, with these cards, but $8 is like the limit on the cash I can have. I don't know. She thinks she can't get a refund if it's, like she can't call the bank and say, that wasn't a valid transaction, someone stole his card and, I don't know, bought whatever it was he bought.
You could go to an ATM.
I know that. I know that. But that's effort. There's even one here on campus for my bank, but I have to walk to the other side, over by the student center. This takes a while. So most folks start by snorting cocaine. A lot of folks will eventually switch over to other methods. Again, any of the other sort of ways that you could take cocaine will have a slightly higher likelihood that you will abuse that because the onset of the high is sooner, right? If you were to take a drug now, as we've discussed, and then wait an hour and then you get the high, you're not going to be able to connect those two events together, right? And it's going to be difficult to do. If you were to take a drug now and in the next minute you start feeling high, that connection is going to be very strong, right? It's all about timing. Because neurons that fire together wire together, as said by Donald O'Hell. And if the neuron that fired was the one that said, hey, I just injected a drug, and the other neuron that fired was, wow, I feel really great, then they're going to really become entwined. Huh?
They're friends.
They're friends for life. They might stop talking for a while, right? But then as soon as you start using cocaine again, they've refriended each other on Facebook. That's a true story.
That should be a children's book.
It should be, right?
Have you seen like Jeopardy categories that are annoyingly like ancient things in Facebook terms or whatever? That's what I would want.
No.
Okay.
I used to watch Jeopardy.
It takes like an old category and tries to make it relevant, and it just doesn't work.
But for some reason now I feel like at 7:30 I have something else I'm doing.
You should not moderate debates.
You should not moderate debates.
Did you see that?
No.
Go watch it.
Not an Alex Trebek fan.
Well, he's fine on Jeopardy, he's not as a debate moderator.
Not great at Jeopardy.
Maybe he used to be. He's kind of old now, right?
He just acts like he's the shit, but like, dude, you have the answer.
I know, right? Like, how smart is that guy, really? Like, I think if you met him on the street, he may not know how to tie his shoes.
Right.
Right? Maybe he'd just, like, read from a teleprompter.
And he has to do the accents. I'm like, come on, do it.
Yeah. There you go. What about cocaine binges? That's something, right? People can do that. You've got to worry about abstinence syndrome afterward, though, right? So you're going to have withdrawal. Another big deal. Comorbidity with other psychiatric disorders. You guys are really shocked about this, right? If you've got other things going on, you're going to be more likely to start abusing drugs. ACEs, yeah. So go back in time and prevent all those bad things from happening to you when you were kids. That's the best way to make people better.
I just moved to Minnesota.
Do they have the lowest
They have
ACEs?
a really low rate of ACEs.
Abortion.
Or abortion.
Yeah, just abort them first.
Reported
They
ACEs.
don't have the children that are gonna have.
So does
ACEs.
Minnesota have a high rate of abortions too?
I don't have that data.
Ooh, what if that is?
That would make sense.
I'm just interested in that now. I should look into that.
But it's reported ACEs. They might
Reported
also have
ACEs.
less people.
Maybe the
or is it a
Minnesotans are too
percentage?
nice to report their ACEs.
Yeah, I mean, the beating wasn't that bad.
It was okay.
Let's see. Hey, this is actually interesting. So they did this PET study, right? And that's positron emission tomography. It's not cats and dogs. Although you can do a PET scan on a cat or a dog, right? If you want it. So they do this, it actually looks at sort of like metabolic activity, right? Like dopamine, dopamine release. What was really interesting is that when you took these folks who were, cocaine users, and you actually showed them cocaine-related stimuli, and you didn't have to show them, you don't have to give them cocaine or show them cocaine. You just like show them things, that maybe that are associated with cocaine use. You actually saw like an increase in their dopamine release in the dorsal striatum, which is that ventral tegmental area of the nucleus accumbens, right? It's actually pretty cool. So that's one of the reasons why these addictions are difficult to break, right? It's not just the drug itself that becomes reinforcing, it's the steps up to that. How many of you have read The Biology of Desire, which I recommended at least 4 weeks ago for you to read? None of you. There's some great stories in there. And they talk about the ritual and the steps involved in obtaining the drug and taking the drug, right? And that's really, so I feel like that's like an area you have to target as well, right? Which is kind of tough. Don't worry about this too much. Basically, this is just showing you when you showed someone a stimulus that was related to cocaine, you had increased activity in these brain regions, and that was correlated with how they rated their craving. Not a big deal. You guys know about tolerance. There's also sensitization, which we didn't really talk about much. How many of you don't have to answer this, how many of you, because nobody's going to answer these things, like let's say, we can talk about like energy drinks, right? I know some of you need those. How many of you used to use energy drinks but you don't now because, now if you take just like a small dose of one of those things, you get like heart palpitations or something. Anybody or know someone like that, right? I mean, that's like a story. It happens, I guess. People can become, no, you don't think so? No. Just start randomly giving people high doses of caffeine, right, to see if they develop problems. You can develop sensitization. Basically, it means that you have sort of an increased response to that drug, right? This happens to a number of folks. You guys have heard people who say, like, I don't know what happened, I just can't take that drug anymore. Every time I do, it's worse, right? Let's see, Jessica knows this. It's not you, but you've heard people say it.
You can't even do caffeine.
A lot of Ohioans say that.
Orange juice.
Yeah.
Orange juice?
She can't drink orange juice.
That just winds me
too
up for
hyped
some
up.
reason. Caffeine gives me the shakes.
Wow. That's something.
Yeah.
No, there are some people, though, interestingly, so I was talking to my other class about this, about folks who take Benadryl and get hyperactive. Yeah, Sierra knows about this.
Well, yeah. I tried to dope up my dog for a car ride and it didn't work.
Yeah, I know that can happen.
Yep. Apparently that happens with children too, so that's terrifying.
It does, right? And so some of you are going to have kids either intentionally or accidentally. And you're going to try to, right, Benadryl,
Knock 'em out, yeah.
because you're not going to waste your good bourbon on them. So you're going to try Benadryl. Because they have it dosed for little kids, right? Bourbon they don't. Just because they put it in a small glass doesn't mean it's for little kids. Just giving you a heads up.
Wipe the rim with it.
Be cool if they could.
That's enough.
Yeah, child-sized bourbon. It comes in a little eyedropper.
Yeah.
We're on to something, Kyle.
Yeah.
We can sell this. But some folks will give their kids Benadryl to put them to sleep. Doesn't work for all kids. Doesn't even work for all adults, right? So some people have the reverse reaction to that.
Damn.
Yeah, it's not a surefire method. Watch out for that. So some people have opposite reactions to things, which is kind of interesting, I guess. I don't know. And apparently there's a study where some people think cilantro tastes like soap. You guys heard about this? I mean, isn't that
It
crazy?
does. It's
Cilantro's
disgusting.
Yeah.
No. I think it smells like stink bugs.
Yeah, apparently there's like some genetic anomaly where people think it tastes like soap. Yeah, I had a couple of students in my other class who were like, yeah, I heard about that. I'm not up on my cilantro literature, but there you go. Apparently Kyle loves cilantro. Keep that in mind for his next birthday. You guys get each other birthday gifts?
No.
I wouldn't either.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Now we're gonna like talk about divisions and rifts in the class, right? There are like maybe 5 of you who get each other birthday gifts, and there's like one who's like, I wish I was in that group. I'm really disappointed. I just try to be crabby to everybody, Jason, that way I don't have to buy them gifts. They don't buy me things, but then you get what you want, right? There's always that person who gets you something nice that you can't return, she really didn't want, and then you think, I don't know enough people to give this away and run the risk of them not seeing it, right?
You get my dog's gift. Yeah.
That's weird.
I'd love to
Did you
get
get a
a gift.
Benadryl?
No.
Don't
do that.
From them.
Do that.
Oh dear God.
Yeah,
Could you imagine
we-
your dog's more hyper?
When we moved up from North Carolina, we gave our cats some sort of sedative. I drew the long straw, and I got to drive the big truck, and my wife had to drive the cat car. And she said the sedative didn't work for one of the cats. It had the opposite effect, and he was apparently wild and noisy for the like 6-hour drive.
Oof. Just turn the music up.
Yeah, they just sing along.
That one on the roof.
Strap them in. So there you go. Sensitization, we talked about that, not a big deal. You guys know about it now. You do have tolerance to cocaine typically, so you have to start taking higher doses. You guys know about that as well, right? How does this happen? Well, there are a few things that happen at those terminals. One, you can actually reduce the amount of dopamine that you release, right? So if the dopamine's going to hang out there longer, then you should release less of it, right? That's a homeostatic mechanism. Your normal rate of dopamine uptake can be reduced as well. You can, you can do all kinds of things that kind of get you into that, lower dopamine function to where you need to take a higher dose of cocaine. Some of your autoreceptors, that's the D2 receptors, or the autoreceptors, they aren't maybe as sensitive as they used to be. All kinds of problems. So don't take cocaine. I think that's the moral of the story, right?
Do you ever produce more dopamine receptors?
Can you?
Yeah, is it possible? And do they frequently?
I mean, not if you're taking cocaine. I mean, because you would want to produce fewer dopamine receptors, right, to stay at the homeostatic
Well,
level.
I mean, yeah, that's what you would want, but would your body produce more to try to deal with all the dopamine that's in your system? I mean, would it try to, I don't know, take advantage of dopamine in order, I don't know, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, as a homeostatic mechanism, you wouldn't, I mean, in this case, you wouldn't want to. The only time you would want to increase dopamine levels, or dopamine receptor levels, is if you had a reduced amount of dopamine. So if you were taking let's say you were taking a drug that blocked dopamine release, for example, then you might start to produce more dopamine receptors to take advantage of the few molecules that were being released. Yeah. But don't go screwing around with your dopamine receptors. Cause you problems.
So you stop doing cocaine when your receptors come back?
Eventually. Yeah. It takes a while. And, it's a blast, too, to go through that experience. That's the withdrawal period, right? And so you're going to feel absolutely awful. Because what do you need to feel good? And also serotonin. And cocaine's screwing around with both of those. And so when you stop taking it and your dopamine and serotonin activity is lower than baseline, right? Because you've been trying to pull it down as the cocaine has been trying to ratchet it up, right? Because you want to kind of keep it where it belongs. When you stop using cocaine, you're going to be at that below baseline. You're going to have to come back up.
Does an SSRI do that too then? Like
Yeah.
if you're taking an SSRI, then you'll stop doing as many receptor sites?
Yeah, so you would have to worry about with an SSRI tolerance issues. They're not quite as powerful as cocaine, and you can kind of monitor the dose a little better. They come in different size pills. Cocaine does come in different size rocks, but just so you know, but you usually don't, you're not pre-measured, right? You just kind of get a little baggie of stuff and do what you do. So you're under a little tighter control with SSRIs. They're not quite as strong, but still you have to worry about those issues with any sort of drug. I mean, you may see folks who've been on a drug for an extended period of time and it's no longer effective, right? And the reason for that is they built up some tolerance. Switching to a different class of drug would probably be helpful in those cases, right? Because you have to worry about cross tolerance. So if you're taking one SSRI and it's not effective, taking a different SSRI, assuming they both have the same active site, is probably not going to be effective, right? Because whatever tolerance mechanisms you've developed are going to work in the same place, and that drug's going to try to attack that same point, and it's not going to be effective. So you have to use something that works in a different way. I don't know, is that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, right? You guys don't think about those things. So what you should do is we should make, now we're on to something. What if we made like a sampler of drugs, right? And so that way nobody develops tolerance to anything. You're just like constantly rotating which drug they're taking every like 3 weeks.
Like those Valentine's chocolate boxes.
Yeah.
You gotta take the labels off though, so you never know
Coming
what
out
it's gonna be.
Valentine's Day.
Coming out Valentine's Day. Hey, we've got time to get this to market. I think we can get that by Warren Hatch.
Call it a party pack.
Call it a party pack. And call it a dietary supplement so the FDA doesn't get involved.
Great idea.
And then just hire those guys at Home Depot to put it together for us.
I don't know about that.
I saw it on a documentary. You can do this.
We'll see.
So there's this documentary, Bigger, Faster, Stronger. This guy, he was looking, I think we talked about it in this class, as a matter of fact, right? And so he was looking at ways to make like dietary supplements, and he just hired, you know, the guys who like stand outside of home improvement stores, who are like migrant workers, and you just hire them to do roofing. He hired like 3 of these guys to make pills in his house, like just off the street corner. Just like packing pills and then printing labels and putting them in bottles. Yeah. Huh?
That's legitimate work.
Yeah. I mean, I think they were like a little confused, but
I probably wouldn't argue.
no.
If I
it's
got
just-
in his car.
I mean, it's all legal
I don't know how that works.
and compliant with regulations.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Here's dopamine levels. And this is kind of interesting. So you're giving somebody, you know, cocaine. They have high immune responses, not a big deal. Tolerance. You guys know about this. We should move through this a little faster. I mean, you guys have got the main points here, right? Hey, if you use a bunch of cocaine, guess what happens? You have problems with impulse control, working memory, verbal learning and memory, performance on psychomotor tasks. Remember, we said you're going to do things faster but not more proficient. And have some trouble with decision making. Hey, Jason, where does most of this business going on? Do you have any? Yeah, right.
But it really doesn't matter because your self-image gets improved, you know.
It doesn't matter, right? It's like, oh, I'm doing horrible, but I feel great about it, so who cares? So, yeah, I guess that works, right? But I think that definitely brings up an interesting point, Jason, surprisingly. And it's about like people who, why is it hard for people who have a drug problem to realize they have a drug problem, right? Because again, if you're self-image, you're taking a bunch of cocaine, you're like, wow, I'm awesome. I don't need to go talk to any of you for help, right? So it really becomes a difficult thing actually getting someone to come in and actually talk about their problems. It's a real challenge. Right, I mean, seriously, I mean, it really is. I mean, I'm not, it's like one of the few times when I'm actually gonna like give you guys some credit for what you do. Because that's tough. It's tough to get people in, it's tough to keep people coming back, right? I mean, I can just imagine coming in and talking to any random one of you and not wanting to come back for like the second session, right? Like if I had to have a one-on-one conversation. I mean, right, think about your peers here. I mean, how motivated are you to come in and sit down and talk to one of them like an hour a week?
They all build a very good rapport.
Yeah, but it's not easy though, right? Especially if there's a guy who comes in while he's on cocaine, right? What do you do then?
If you walked in, I would be hoping you didn't show up next time.
Not me. Let's say someone walks in and they're on cocaine. It's going to be a tough session, right?
Or entertaining.
Or entertaining, yeah. I mean, I guess at some point you just have to go, well, see when this hour runs out. I know, right? You got confused there, just flashing back and forth. Not a big deal. I love these, like, these brain imaging studies. So we should talk about these for just a moment, Corey, because I think they're actually kind of interesting. And then I'm going to tell you how I think most of them are useless to you. And the reason for that is, it's like they'll do these MRI studies, right? And so they're like, well, look at this, like, people who are on cocaine have bigger ventricles or smaller ventricles, or their left caudate is larger or smaller, right? And it's like, okay. The problem is the resolution on these images, right, is pretty poor sometimes, and really is it that structure or is it an underlying structure, right? So that's always hard to tell. The second thing is, you don't know if this is the cause or the effect, right? Because how many of you have had an MRI of your brain? Okay, like one of you. I'm not going to ask why. Very few of you. People don't get those, right? It's not like you just go in, you get one, get your random brain checkup. It doesn't happen. And so what happens is, like, let's say later you become a cocaine addict. Well, Jason, we're going to be great. We can go back and look at your brain scan before you were a cocaine addict. And then after you've been on cocaine for 10 years, we can figure something out. That's pretty awesome, right?
Maybe we could do that if MRIs didn't cost as much as they're expensive.
I know they're expensive, right? And that's one reason. They're expensive, they're time consuming, and nobody's going to go in for that. If you don't have to, right? And so, but the rest of you, if the rest of you become cocaine addicts, we're not going to learn anything. We'll do an MRI afterward, maybe. We'll go, oh, ventricles are bigger. But we don't know if they were bigger before, if they were bigger after. Was it the cocaine that made them bigger because of some structural changes that the drug caused in your brain, which is reasonable to expect, right? Or was it because your brain structure wasn't right to begin with, which is also reasonable to expect, right? And so you don't, like, yeah, probably, these brain regions are implicated, right? Prefrontal cortex, of course. Your anterior cingulate cortex, that's emotion. Insula, striatum, we talked about that, amygdala, thalamus, those regions, right? But again, it's like, oh, well, your prefrontal cortex has some abnormalities. Well, your prefrontal cortex is like 15 different brain regions too, right? And so for me to tell you, like, you got a screwed up prefrontal cortex, well, it's like, well, which part? And was that, again, before or after I started taking the cocaine? And we don't know. So they're interesting, but I think largely for you, they're useless. Does that make sense, Cassie? Now, what do you think about MRI studies? There's trash, aren't they? They're expensive trash, though. Because as Jason pointed out, you're not going in there for $550 and getting you a brain scan, right? I mean, they're expensive, thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars. Because they have those big magnets. Magnets are apparently expensive. Hold on. If you ever do get an MRI, make sure you go in wearing like a metal helmet. They love that. Right, Kyle?
Do you want to know an awful story? Probably not, but I'm going to tell you. I know someone and his mom was in a car accident. She was unconscious. They put her in an MRI machine without anyone present, and she had a metal plate in her
Oh.
head. She died.
That was an awful story.
You're welcome. Yeah. Isn't that fucked up?
I love Montana's face. He's thinking, like, shouldn't there be a guy there with like a metal detector first? And like,
put her in there.
It's like beep, beep, beep.
Yes, that's where they should be.
Yeah, yes. Instead of telling me I can't take, like, bath salt scrub on the flights, it seems to happen to me all the time. Yeah, soy candles. I bought a soy candle once. Tried to bring it on an airplane. I got pulled out of line for that. I guess I have
Snow
that.
globes, they don't like those.
Well, those are liquid.
That's
That's just a no-brainer.
It's a burst of my food.
No.
Throw that away.
So much stuff.
Oh, because you weren't going to check your luggage.
No.
If you check your luggage, they'll let you do it.
No, I
Yeah,
think
you
it was
can
in
put
my
anything in there.
carry-on.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
You really can. You can put anything in it. But I don't like to check my luggage.
They don't charge you.
They don't
know what gets flown around.
No. Actually, I know a guy who made it through, like, with a carry-on with a brain dissection kit. I know, right? That's pretty crazy. I mean, he had like scalpels and scissors, like all kinds of stuff. He said he forgot he had it in his bag, and somehow he like made it through security with it, and they let him on the flight. Yes, post 9/11. I mean again.
Why did he have the kid in his backpack to begin with? That's my concern.
Well, he was traveling, somewhere to do a dissection. This happens.
Okay.
It was for research. I mean, he was a student at one place and then needed to go somewhere else to do some work, and he was flying to get there. He had like a, you know, like this project that was like a joint project.
You don't take your kid everywhere?
No.
So, I mean, I can't even, again, a candle, and the bath salt stuff I bought was, and not like the bath salts we're gonna talk about, these were like actual bath salts you put in your bath, right? They actually pulled me out of line and made me go check my bag, like the agent walked with me the whole time, like, pretty serious.
Did the metal plate get sucked out of her head?
Yeah. It was-
Yep, dead.
Didn't just lift her up there.
No.
I don't know if your skull would like keep it from getting sucked out or.
Pulled that sucker
What's
right
stronger,
out.
the magnet or the skull?
The magnet. The magnet, trust me, those magnets are huge.
Dead.
Final destination.
It is final destination shit.
It is. Was she in like critical condition at least?
Don't they ask you that before?
She was unconscious,
She was
you missed
She was
that part of the story.
unconscious, they just popped her in. They're like, fuck it, let's see what's going on in there.
Easy makeup.
Awful minute.
Dead.
She'd be on a board somewhere, you know?
Some people carry cards.
Yeah.
I think if I get a metal plate, I'll tell you what I'm doing now. I'm getting a head tattoo. Because I'm gonna go right here, metal plates. I'm just gonna shave my head. I know it's gonna look weird, but it's gonna save my life one day. I think a lot of times now they use plastic, right? My uncle's got a plastic plate in his head.
Why do they put plates in your head?
He had a cerebral bypass, and they had to remove part of his skull to reroute a blood vessel in his temporal artery. It's a long story. He went in because he was having bypass surgery, like cardiac bypass surgery, but he never takes his like blood pressure medication. And so after he had the surgery, of course they're giving him the medicine he should have been taking. Simultaneously, the pain medicine will sometimes drop your blood pressure, but apparently it dropped it with the medication and both medications. Dropped it enough to where the blood wasn't getting past this calcium deposit he had, like in his brain. Yeah, I know. And a blood vessel in his brain, and so then he had a stroke, which is sort of interesting. And so after the stroke, they were like, well, there's something there, we need to bypass that. So they cut out part of his skull and then rerouted the blood flow around the blockage. I've got a video of it.
Of course.
I do. The doctor offered, he's like, hey, I've got video clips. I was like, yeah. I'll take 'em. How many of you have access to a cerebral bypass video? None of you. It's a rare thing, right?
How many times have you watched it?
With or without popcorn. The problem is they're all like in these like 2-minute clips. So you kind of like start one, we're gonna start the next one. And so it's not really conducive to.
Yeah, not really.
It takes a while. So there you go. Let's see. What else can you do if you're on cocaine? Again, we've talked about some of the folks who have the paranoid psychosis and delusions and hallucinations, so it seems similar, right? Lots of other things are badly affected, right? Your heart, lungs, GI tract, kidneys, not a big deal. You can get holes in that nasal septum if you snort a bunch of cocaine, right? That's that thing that goes up the middle of the 2 holes in your nose. You guys didn't know what that was. Oh, and here's a shocker. Cocaine use during pregnancy can cause some problems in your child.
I thought it just sped things up.
Get that thing out in 5.5 months.
Won't be right.
No, proficiency's gonna drop. There you go. There you go. There are a number of things they've tried to use to treat folks. Doesn't seem to work. Right? There are other psychostimulants that we could think about, which we talked about a few of those. Not a big deal. see if we can talk about, oh, cocaine vaccines. Everybody wants a vaccine for cocaine, right? Why not? You never know, right? I mean, you just want to kind of protect yourself from that. You guys know about all these like therapeutic steps, right? Apparently there's a Cocaine Anonymous. Yeah, I didn't know that. There you go. That's fun. All kinds of, you guys know about like contingency management programs, right? I don't need to go into any of that. So we can talk about amphetamine a little bit, shift gears slightly. It's you know, it's part of the family of these like synthetic psychostimulants, right? So when you get into, again, the synthetic business, I think you're really messing around with some stuff you shouldn't, right? All of these are going to be very similar to dopamine. They're going to be structured that way. Methamphetamine falls into this group, right? So you guys, I don't know if you guys have heard about methamphetamine. Did you hear anything about that? There are some plant compounds as well, right? A number of these have been used for a long time. Some of them haven't been used as long. Here you go, there's your dopamine structure. If you look at any of these, they look very similar to you. They probably look identical to most of you, right? You don't really know what you were looking at to try to find those differences. They should look the same, that's fine. That's going to help you. I mean, it's just a number. I think what's important is to think about. I guess unfortunately here, I mean, so my this is probably a broad assumption. I'm going to assume that most of the clients you see are not from somewhere other than here, right? I mean, there's not a. I don't know if you guys know this. There's not a major influx of people to West Virginia from other places. Right? So we're not really, you know, you're not really getting, I know we talk about like those cultural components, right? You're not really stretching it, right? We have somebody from Cleveland. That's stretching out there. So, I don't know, I think one important thing is that, you know, some of these drugs have been used in other cultures. The connotations of some of these drugs are not the same, right? And some of them are used regularly and without issue. What happens sometimes is the derivatives of the drugs become more powerful and they have that abuse potential, and those are things to worry about. You guys missed most of the 90s, I'm going to assume, right? Or you at least weren't thinking about weight loss drugs during the 90s. You might have been thinking about other things like Power Rangers or something. You guys Power Rangers people? Are they Power Rangers people, Jason? You're not.
Hell yeah.
I know you're not.
Yellow Ranger for life.
Yeah.
Explains so much. But ephedra, you guys heard of ephedra? It was like a weight loss drug. Problem with it is it can elevate blood pressure and you know, heart attack or stroke. Same side effects of cocaine, right? So there you go.
Somebody in my hometown, like, one year ahead of me, actually died from that.
Really? Yeah, I mean, that's why they stopped using it, is because it killed people. I mean, it wasn't effective, you know, weight loss up until the time it kills you. So it's dangerous stuff. A lot of people were taking that, and it caused some serious problems. So, interestingly, ephedra was also used as an anti-asthmatic drug, which is kind of interesting, and also would treat narcolepsy. Nothing will keep you awake like a psychostimulant, right? Getting a little sleepy, just take a little amphetamine. In fact, amphetamine was used for that very reason, right? You can imagine there are certain jobs, like if you were in the trenches during World War II, staying awake sounds helpful to me. I've not been in combat, but I can just imagine that would be helpful. So there you go. A lot of folks don't use amphetamine anymore. They'll use cocaine instead, right? Except methamphetamine. but amphetamine was popular, actually, you know, like sports, that was actually probably one of the first performance-enhancing drugs that was used on a regular basis was amphetamine. It's like the one and only time the Pirates were ever good, they were all on amphetamine. No, seriously, it was in the 70s. They were all on amphetamine. There you go, right? All kinds of street names for amphetamine, you guys don't need to know these. I'm sure, Jessica, you know all the code names.
I don't, I always have to ask.
Really? You should
Yeah,
learn those.
I know.
That's actually a bright idea.
Street cred.
Yeah,
Close.
just, they'll say some and
Got some
just,
My go-go juice.
Goat?
No, that's it, you got some go.
No.
Yeah.
Oh.
People,
This guy at Dreamland, he wanted to say
No,
dog
it's-
food.
Dog food?
Yeah. I assumed it meant hair.
I've heard of speed.
You've heard of Speed.
Yep.
Was that other than the movie with Keanu Reeves?
Yeah.
Okay.
Craig's a movie too. Yeah, Craig movie. Jason, is that him? Statham in that?
Yeah, I think he was in that movie.
chasing
That's
the
right.
dragons on there, that's a very
That
personal
was
thing to call it.
What is it?
Well, you
Chasing the dragon.
you might see an older person.
Dopers.
Yeah.
That's
I thought Chasing the Dragon was hair.
Chasing the dragon.
Uh,
I did
Yeah,
too.
it's a video game.
Apparently it's meant to.
He won't, that's on South Park, Chasing the Dragon, there's a video
Yeah.
game, and it's just like the needle, like they're just shooting a needle in their arm, and then the dragon is like, you almost got me, you almost got me. Reality.
I'm glad you're in this class.
I like it, I'm learning some stuff.
Hey, how many of you have ever tried to buy pseudoephedrine?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't, right? You have to get that little card, and then you have to go up, and they look at you. Like,
Yeah.
What the hell is super?
are you gonna make meth with this? And the reason is, some people make meth with it. And that's why, you know, when people were going in and buying like 15 boxes of pseudoephedrine, like, oh, that's for my school. I don't know, what kind of excuse are you going to give for that? I don't know. Just buying one for everybody on my block.
Yeah.
Just trying to keep everybody healthy.
Flu season.
Flu season.
So you need it, you don't wanna have to go through all the process.
You don't. I'm buying early. I'm feeling good now, but I come in and, you know, just pick up a box or 12. See what happens.
Won't be sick anymore.
I won't. I mean, you won't have teeth anymore, but there's that, you know.
That's for chicken.
So a lot of things are tightly controlled that were used to, or some people use to make methamphetamine. Certain household cleaners, right? I don't know. This was big when I was in graduate school. The local police there had all these billboards like, "Hey, if you need us to pick up your batteries, don't leave them around for meth heads." I don't know. I get, you know, because they can use like the acid and stuff to catalyze reactions, I guess. I don't know. But like there were certain household cleaners, batteries that they would pick up at like the police station. You could take your things. I don't know if you guys want to walk over to like campus police with some batteries someday and say like, look, just worried about people making meth.
Someone tried to make meth in Walmart.
In Walmart?
In Walmart.
They made.
They needed it right
In the
now.
bathroom, I bet.
Was it in the bathroom?
I bet.
Yep. Like he threw the pants. I mean, I wasn't there, but.
You seem to know a lot about this.
Well, it's not a very big place. you
They
know.
only have Walmart. Everybody's there.
Oh, I see. You seem to know where he's from.
It's in their retirement too. It's a fun trip.
She said that. But,
Dating.
oh,
Right?
this story makes a lot more sense. Megan, why are you like randomly going to this place that apparently has no other attraction? I mean, if they just have a Walmart and think like, why is she going there?
There's only Walmart.
Yeah, and apparently Kyle is there as well.
So I guess I am.
So you're like the second biggest attraction in your hometown.
Next to Walmart, that's pretty good.
That is pretty good, right? I mean, you're going up against a multi-billion-dollar company there.
Doing pretty good.
Yeah, bringing more people to town than Walmart. They should put you on the tourism commission. You still think about these things, friend. I'm serious about this. You should apply. So there you go. There's methamphetamine. You guys are familiar with that, right? Hey, you know what you can do if you're up on meth? You can take some barbiturates to bring you back down. Yeah. We call that pulling the Elvis. I just made that up.
That sounds real.
That's what he did.
It sounded real, and it is accurate, right? I mean, I don't know that he was on meth, but he was on some other stimulants.
Yeah, on something to sing that poorly.
Oh.
Sorry to all the Elvis fans.
Yeah, I know there's
I
like
didn't mean to say that out loud.
so many of them under the
There's
age of
one
80.
in here.
You've
There's
hurt
one
her.
diehard Elvis fan in
You
here.
hurt her so much.
She doesn't like a lot of things, but she likes cucumbers and that's
Cucumbers and Elvis.
particularly at the same time.
When I was 9, I
That's
dressed
enough.
up as Elvis all for Halloween.
It's all making sense.
Really?
That's
Yeah,
it.
it was the best Halloween costume.
Wow. Jason, I know why you sit way over there.
You know how there's like the grindstone coffee truck? There's someone in my hometown who
Yeah.
drives a meth truck around. He takes it and sells it out of his truck, but then it blew up.
That happens.
A lot of
That
people got
happens.
hurt.
You gotta watch the, so like, as a practical word of advice, if you're ever like stopped next to a van, don't. Because there's like one of three things in there, and
Ice cream.
Children.
ice cream, children, or meth. And you should probably, I mean, two of those you should definitely get away from. I mean, ice cream, you know, it's up to you. But watch out for cat urine. So, like, meth will smell like cat urine. Yeah. Yeah, it'll definitely smell like cat urine. So, my wife's aunt is a real estate agent, and she said, you know, like, they'll go into homes sometimes and it smells like they have a bunch of cats, but there aren't any cats. So,
You question a bunch of places I looked at to rent.
did they smell like cats?
Yeah, a couple of them.
Yeah.
Could just be cat.
Didn't find any litter.
Either way. it's
Scratch
not
marks?
good.
Either way, it's not good. Avoid the cat urine smell, but they will. If you do buy a home, they are required by law to let you know if there's been methamphetamine in the house.
Wow.
That's nice.
Is that confirmed?
Just found yourself. This is like mad.
It's just a law, I don't know. I
You
didn't,
wanted, no, she wanted.
I'm not on the real estate association.
I mean, I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
Fair enough.
If you
Well,
get
we
married
knock
in
on your
Ohio,
door.
they ask if you have AIDS.
it's true.
Sometimes you can mix your methamphetamine with heroin.
Oh, good.
Oh, good, yeah, I know, right? So, speedball, you guys familiar with that? Yeah. That's
A
something.
Dave and Buster.
So there you go.
Ski ball. I thought it was speedball.
Two completely different things. Why would methamphetamine be like a better option for you than cocaine? It's again half-life. Yeah, it's cheaper and you get a longer effect, right? We talked about cocaine half-life being about, what, half an hour, hour and a half, something like that, not very long. Methamphetamine and amphetamine are metabolized a bit slower, so they're going to, you know, take longer. They actually, these guys, they do a couple things. Again, they're going to block that, they get in through that uptake process, and they actually cause the release of dopamine. So they get in, and they just push out dopamine. So that's obviously going to be rewarding for you, right? So that's exciting. And then they do this other weird thing where they, like, basically invert your dopamine transporters to dump out more dopamine. Oh, right? Isn't that amazing? So they're just like flooding your synapse with dopamine when you take any of the amphetamines. So now you can imagine why they are so so addictive, right? Why they're so powerful. They also have an effect on norepinephrine. Not a big deal there. Amphetamine, we did talk about that in athletic performance, right? One of the great things that will improve your athletic performance is if you're awake. And then Jason, it increases confidence, right? So folks on the amphetamine are really confident about their capabilities. Not going to go to sleep. This can be helpful, right? If you need to stay awake for a long time. There are some therapeutic uses for amphetamine, right? Think about a couple places. I would not recommend using these, right? If possible. I don't think amphetamine's great. There are other things that they give now for most of these, right? So amphetamines, you bring in your kid and having trouble sitting still, paying attention to class. Let's give him some amphetamine. That sounds like a good idea, right? I think there are other drugs that are probably better options, right? They even have non-stimulant versions or non-stimulant drugs for ADHD now, which is great. Not a big deal. Don't worry about this too much. I kind of want to get through this so we can talk about a couple other things. Withdrawal symptoms. Basically, you're dealing with a lot of the same symptoms with amphetamines that you are with cocaine, right? Again, we're just having a longer half-life sort of issue. Again, difficult to distinguish from your paranoid schizophrenic symptoms. Not a big deal. Methamphetamine. Let's see. Jason, this is where you're going to reduce your dopamine, reduce that enzyme that helps you make dopamine, and reduce your dopamine transporter, right? When you're on methamphetamine, which is all bad because you need those things, right? Especially if you stop using methamphetamine, and you can actually start killing off some of your dopaminergic cells, which is really bad, right?
Will those come back?
No. Once you kill a brain cell, it's done. It's not going to come back. This is really bad because this starts to kill cells in the substantia nigra, which is that nigrostriatal pathway. The nigrostriatal pathway is the pathway that kicks out in Parkinson's disease. So
This also means you can't return to like a normal level of dopamine production. I mean, is that what you're
yes,
saying?
that's exactly what that means.
That's going to be worse than
So
before
you should
you
just
started.
keep doing that.
Until you die.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, so here's the thing, right? So let's say somebody was on meth for a long time. They killed a bunch of the cells in their substantia nigra. They go off the drug. One of the symptoms you might anticipate would be some Parkinson's-like symptoms, right? Because they don't have that pathway anymore. Then you're going to give them like L-Dopa to treat that, right? So you're just going to give them more dopamine. Yeah.
Just skip all that and stay on the meth.
Just skip all that and stay on the meth, yeah. Or don't start the meth. But that would put some of you out of business.
I'd be okay with it.
You'd be okay with that. See, Jason got into it for the right reasons. The rest of you, money grubbers.
You do realize what our degree is?
Yeah, we don't make money.
Money.
Well, did you really get in this to help people?
Kyle's the only one who makes money.
Yeah, the rest of us are working for free.
Now I know why all the people are coming to your hometown if you make money.
Well, Kyle rolls in the money, is what I meant.
Yeah,
He just helped me over
babies in
here.
it.
They say that, I just go along with it. Sure.
You make some sort of, three of you. I make no money. I see a lot of humans, I make no money.
Same.
They don't pay you at the prison?
No.
I can't.
They can't. Why not?
It's federal government.
The federal government pays a lot of people.
Yeah, but they don't.
But we'd have to be there for a certain amount of time.
Oh, I see.
And my people actually have to come. It's not like they can, not
So that really
be there.
doesn't tell you like how good you are at getting
No.
people to come back. You
I
could,
just
you
have
could have the
an
worst
award for
rapport
it.
building skills ever.
I had a lot of criers the other day, so I feel like I'm doing pretty good with rapport. Pretty good with that one. The rest of it, I'm not so sure, but rapport, I think I got.
Hey, so this is actually looking at tyrosine hydroxylase. It's actually kind of cool. So tyrosine hydroxylase, again, is that enzyme that helps you make dopamine, right? So this is somebody who, it's actually like a rodent, not a person. This is someone who would have normal sort of levels of tyrosine hydroxylase activity. This is an animal that's been given a lot of methamphetamine. And you can see that massive reduction all around in tyrosine hydroxylase activity. So you're not going to be making as much dopamine, because you're trying to compensate for that massive dump of dopamine that you get every time you take methamphetamine. I was just thinking, did you need more time with this slide?
Immature, it's fine.
All right, let's see. There are a lot of things that might happen to actually kill off these cells. Don't worry about it too much. Again, we talked about Parkinson's disease and methamphetamine use, right? So you should see a spike in that. If you see someone with Parkinson's disease and they've had a history of methamphetamine use, you can start to put some stuff together there, start making a story, right? First, we talked about all these other problems as well. This is not even like the worst before and after picture of, right? I mean, this is like a pretty mild before and after picture of someone who was not on meth and then was on meth, right? Some of the ones that you see are pretty bad. I mean, you can see their teeth. Basically, it looks like their skin's falling off. That's why you should avoid that. We already talked a little bit about methylphenidate. Does block the reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine. Not a big deal there. There's some other drugs. Let's see what we should think about. You're probably going to see some folks who have been or were on Ritalin, right? I mean, I think it's still a prescribed drug. I mean, I don't think it's prescribed as much as it was a few years ago because there's some other options out there now. But you'll still see some folks who are on that. Does seem to work. Yeah. Could have some side effects, anxiety, a few other things, obviously, right? There are some folks who use, believe it or not, medical prescription drugs for non-medical purposes. I don't know if you're aware of this, because they can create a high, right? So there you go. Typically, if you take methylphenidate as you should, it's not a problem. Snorting them, on the other hand, that can be problematic, right? Anytime you snort something, you're bypassing that normal absorption process, and whatever sort of effect it has, it's going to have that effect immediately, right? So it's going to become much more addictive that way. That does not apply to things like Flonase, although, right? How often do they tell you to like stay on the? Is it Flonase? It's not Flonase. It's Afrin, right? I don't know, my doctor always tells me don't use Afrin more than like 3 days because it has some addiction potential.
It's gonna be a weird addiction.
I mean, Afrin is good stuff. I mean, it'll really open you up. I don't know, now I'm starting to wonder what people think about me. Because if no one has told you this, and then I get pulled out of the security line all the time at the airport, I'm really just, like, what kind of face am I projecting out there? Look at this guy.
Are you asking for feedback?
Not really.
I
know, right?
That's the face.
But seriously though, if you do use Afrin, don't use it more than 3 days.
Just never used Afrin.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we've never been told
Never
that.
heard of
I've
it.
never heard of it.
You've never heard of it?
No.
I've heard of it, never used it.
I've heard of Flonase.
Yeah, Flonase.
They must not
Sherry loves
advertise well.
Flonase.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe it's
I
like
think
that.
that's,
Maybe. You know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to spell it, obviously. I thought it had 2 F's.
It's a side effect.
He's got
Yeah, it's an over-the-counter. They make different varieties.
You've never seen that.
Wow.
Really?
I've seen
I just don't want to hang out in pharmacies.
What?
You can sickle.
It has rebound congestion caused by overuse. You know, that's what, I A doctor just tells, I mean, like, you know, the 2 times I've been told by a doctor to use that. So don't snort things, that's the other story. We already talked about this, not too much of a worry on that. Hey, Jason, prefrontal cortex, right? That's where all the fun stuff happens.
Actually, that's where the fun gets stopped.
Yeah, yeah. All the fun stuff happens in the amygdala. Yeah. I'll get shut down by that prefrontal cortex. So, I don't know, don't worry about this. This is just sort of, you know, activity levels in the prefrontal cortex. Anybody heard of Provigil or Methamphetamine? I'll give this to folks too. Really, it's the same thing as methylphenidate, but they've added like a sulfur atom to it. Not a big deal. It does bind to the dopamine transporter, pretty low affinity, so it's not really, it's like a weak dopamine uptake inhibitor. It also has a little bit of norepinephrine and orexin activity. Orexin is not a neurotransmitter a lot of folks think about, but it's definitely involved in like the sleep-wake cycle. And it'll inhibit GABA release. All of these things will definitely kind of increase your vigilance, right? Keep you awake. So not a big deal. They'll typically give this to folks with narcolepsy, if you've got sleep apnea, folks who have disordered sleep issues because of sleep work, you know, shift work. So you might be seeing folks who fall into some of those categories, right? So they might be on this particular medication. Not a big deal. They use this in the military some, like they've tested it with like helicopter pilots, things, where they'll give helicopter pilots, they keep them awake for days on this kind of stuff. It's kind of interesting. Also kind of helps with like, you can get a little bit of a cognitive enhancement by taking this. Yeah, there you go, right? That's what you all need. You know, if your doctor says so, that's fine. What about synthetic cathinone derivatives? Right? Anybody heard of these things? Right? They make people do crazy stuff. I love the names for these kinds of drugs. Bath salts, yeah, plant food, pond water cleaner. That's one of my favorites. I don't know. Doesn't that really just sound bad, like pond water? Like, who's going to take that? I mean, some people, obviously. There you go, Megan. Looks like rock candy.
Yeah, it just needs to be blue.
Needs to be blue.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can snort these guys or you know, take them orally. They've got effects just basically like your other psychostimulants, not a big deal. They can, however, cause some serious problems. Liver, kidneys, you can die. Get some anxiety, you know, get your delusions and hallucinations and so forth. Yeah, and self-injury. Yeah, so you can definitely have some psychotic episodes. I think that's where most people hear about these bath salts, right? Like people having these psychotic episodes after they've used bath salts. Why do they continue to call them bath salts? I feel like that's like a really, that's like such a common name. Like somebody's going to get confused and think they were actually talking about bath, like cosmetic bath salts, right? And so I think that's confusing. So I don't know. Did anybody else think that like that it could be confusing?
Poor Brandon using Epsom salts.
Poor Brandon. Yeah, I know. It's going crazy on the Epsom salts. I know some people tried it. Like, wow, you can get high on these.
Maybe you can.
Who knows? Who knows? They do act just like amphetamine. They'll, you know, release dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, block reuptake. Not a big deal. You guys know this stuff, right? Let's see, what else do we need to know? Oh, that's the end of that. Questions about those psychostimulants, because I would like to move on and have a chat about some other things.
We were in Coyote Joe's local bar in 2 days. This bitch on
I
bath
think it's
salt.
something store that we back inside the bath salt.
Snacks. Once had a break, threw her on the ground and then bit a
It
piece
gets
of
you
her
high,
face
though.
off.
Yeah.
Not for relaxing time.
I don't know.
I
That's
wonder if somebody's done it the opposite.
Yeah, it was pretty badass.
come to
The
think
bath
about it.
salts at Coyote Joe's. This bitch smacked another bitch off the brick wall and then took a bite out of her face. And then she ran into the abandoned apartment buildings across the street. No one ever found her. No, it's the best bar. It's so much fun. But you never go to the bathroom alone in Coyote Joe's. Always have a partner with you. Everywhere.
This is why I drink at home. I don't like people biting me. Hey, who wants to talk about nicotine and caffeine? That's something.
Do it.
Sure.
How many of you have ever used one of these? I mean, you know, like everybody, right?
Yeah.
Except the New York
Sierra.
Tom Holland.
These are caffeine.
He said orange. No, you said caffeine.
He's a Mormon?
He doesn't drink caffeine.
Close.
He just doesn't drink caffeine.
Yeah.
So no,
But he's had it though, right?
I don't think.
Some people can't.
He also gets high on orange juice.
It happens.
High on life, bro.
Oh, Lord.
You guys have some problems. Nicotine that's in tobacco leaves, that's a shocker, right? Nobody knew that. There you go. That's been used for like thousands of years, right? Probably have seen this somewhere on the road, just growing. You thought it was cabbage? That's
Yeah,
not
it doesn't
cabbage
look
at
like
all.
that. It's brown in the cigarette.
So what they will do is they will let this grow,
That was really
right?
Yeah.
And then they'll harvest it,
And it'll dry
and then they
out.
tie it up, and then they hang it in a barn upside down, and it dries. And that's when it turns brown. And then they have to like roast it and such. There's some other steps in there, but they're not that
It looks so
important.
much healthier like that. You could do
It does.
that. Just do it that way.
Eat the
Just
Yeah,
eat
what
it.
if you eat it? Munch on that, tasty.
People do that all the time. There's like chewing tobacco, right? There's like a whole,
You have to swallow that though.
no, I wouldn't recommend swallowing the leaf. It's just kind of adds up.
Smoke's nuts.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Like
It's the little
snuff, but
pouches.
the little
The little
pouches where
tiny
they actually
baby
swallow
ones.
it.
Oh, that's correct.
It's very popular in high school.
They look like insect
People in my high
pods.
school.
It's like
Insect pods?
introduction.
That's what it makes me think of, like
They didn't use
spider,
pouches, Mom used
like
much right from
sacks or something.
Huh.
Yeah, it's.
Well, that's something.
Never even used that.
Can't say I'm too familiar with those.
Mickey Six.
So tobacco, you know, is actually grown here in North America and South America for sort of a long time, a couple varieties, and then you know, made its way over to Europe and so forth, and whatever. And then they developed the cigarette machine. That apparently was a big innovation in tobacco use. I mean, I think so, right? Because I mean, it's just like so much effort, I think, to like roll your own, right? You have to, it just takes time. Nobody wants to take time. And then there was the e-cigarette thing. I think that's probably like a big deal now, right? I see these people, well,
Say
I mean, I just, so, I tell you, at home, I've got a soldering iron, and I'm gonna tell you, there are a lot of places I'm not gonna put it, and one of them's my mouth. Because it's the same, like the e-cigarettes, it's the same basic technology that operates a soldering iron that vaporizes, right? So it's, well, you can think about what it's doing to, like you doing something to a soldering iron, but it's just not something I'm gonna sign up for.
What if you don't smoke?
just vaping.
Opinions.
I'm sorry, what?
What if you don't smoke and you just vape? Opinions.
Yeah,
Isn't it
I
the
mean,
same?
you're still getting nicotine, I still don't, I mean, I feel like, this is my honest opinion on this, is that the electronic cigarettes, we don't know I mean, we don't know, right? We just don't know. And we don't know what's coming off of that. And I will tell you, again, I have used a soldering iron a bunch, and every time I do, I wear a mask, and I make sure I have a vent running to get that, odor out of the room, because that can actually cause problems. So that's just my take on it. But that's me. You can make whatever choices you want. I assume you're old enough to do that.
No, let's talk about me.
I wasn't talking about you either. I'm just saying if someone's old enough to make their own decisions, they're welcome to do whatever. But I do think we just don't know a lot about the chemicals that are released and what you're inhaling. And again, really, I mean, it's the same technology that's in a soldering iron. It really is. I just think about that.
You're putting it in your mouth.
I know, right?
What's Doc's last
Lanning.
name? Lanning, okay. You never hear anyone say Dr. Lanning. It's just Doug. Just your Doug.
Well.
There you go. So here's sort of like I don't know, it's kind of an interesting graph, right? Like the percentage of high school students using nicotine has been pretty stable. It's just kind of switched between like tobacco cigarettes and e-cigarettes. I think people think e-cigarettes are healthier. I don't know that they are, again, because I don't think we know.
We thought that about cigarettes too originally.
I know, right? Because there were those people like, yeah, man, it just really soothes your throat until it gives you throat cancer. Right up until that point where you grow a lump, it's going to be soothing. Yeah, I don't know. So there you go. You guys know how people smoke stuff, right? Whatever. Just go through this quickly. Chewed and snorted. Yeah, they used to snort snuff, right? So like snuff really is like a snort, not in your jaw.
Huh.
You guys didn't know that?
How did they get it up there?
Just you guys don't know about snuff boxes?
No. Before our time.
Yeah, it's before like a lot of people's time. Except, I wish Dr. Maywalt were here, because I could say except Dr. Maywalt.
He's not too far.
Oh, apparently Snuffbox was a dark British comedy. I didn't know that. That's not really what I was wanting. I was really wanting a snuff box like this, and snuffed into the nasal cavity. I don't know why. Why are there so many?
What's going on?
Apparently that is called the snuff box.
Because that's where you put it.
It is.
Yeah.
Because you would just
Oh.
Yeah.
snuff it right there.
Okay, I knew that one.
I thought you were supposed to use your pinky nail.
That's for coke.
That's coke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they make these little boxes. They're particularly females would carry them, and then they would, snuff. I mean, have you ever thought about why do they call it snuff and you put it in your mouth? That doesn't make any sense.
I always did.
Well,
That's
putting
a
it in your
misnomer.
mouth doesn't make a lot of sense either.
They grind it more.
I just thought it was a bad name.
Snuff is kind of.
I know.
Right, is it just like a nose full
Yeah.
of leaves at that point? That just sounds like it's defeating the purpose.
Yeah.
Does it absorb better that way?
So think about that for a moment.
And then it's just sitting in your lungs?
No, it goes up into your nasal cavity. It's just like snorting anything else.
We should probably find someone to do that for us now, just so we can see.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the preferred route of entry for
We can talk some college student into it, for sure.
tobacco. I'm sure we can, but
Oh, yeah, Alex will totally
He'll
do
do
it.
it.
I feel like there's some
Give him
ethical
$5.
issue there that I don't think I can be part of. But if you happen to film it, I'll watch it later. So there you go. I mean, not a big deal. What's really interesting though is that like nicotine will rapidly accumulate in the brain. So it's when you are using tobacco, it is getting in there pretty quickly, right? Which is kind of interesting. We've already talked about I don't know. I feel like if I need a microprocessor to control my drug delivery, then maybe something else. There you go. That one's even got a laser pointer on it. And the juice tank. Not for orange juice, Jessica. Probably have one that's orange. I don't know, I drive by these places all the time, right? They're like the vape shop, and there's like these like changing LED lights or something in there. I'm like, I don't know what that
They
is.
have all the flavors.
Yeah.
There's so many flavors.
I know, right? Which is actually a problem because, you guys want a little background story here because I'm going to tell you this anyway. Originally, tobacco used to come in like a bunch of flavors, right? And then they decided that's probably a bad idea because people like flavors, right? But the only flavor they left, interestingly, was the menthol flavor, which is interesting because it's preferred in the like some minority groups, right? So it's preferred in these minority groups, right? So they're just going to let you continue to do that, but not for the kids, right? Isn't that kind of interesting? There's a guy over at the med school who does some work, Brandon Henderson, with like menthol flavored stuff in mice. He's got like this like vaporizer, which I guess is good. The e-cigarette, the good thing out of that is you can like vaporize nicotine now for delivery to animals, so you don't have to try to teach a rat to smoke a cigarette.
And roll those kind of cigarettes.
Just trying to think about that. I know, right? I mean, I saw a rat play basketball once, but I just don't think it's going to light a cigarette. I don't think that's going to happen. It's just me. But anyway, they can vaporize these, but they come in flavors, right? Which is a real problem, right? And I think kids are thinking like, wow, these things are, and then now they have the new ones, like the things that like plug in that look like USB ports, right? Or USB drives, those things. No, I stick that right. Look at that USB drive, and there's like this big cloud of smoke, water vapor. I guess it's water vapor. That's a big difference. Rolling out your face. That's not obvious. Yeah, I don't know. What are you gonna do? Technology. I had nothing there. No worries. Your liver enzymes break this down. Not a big deal. Half-life, 2 hours. That's why people keep smoking all the time, right? How often do people typically smoke?
Once an hour.
Yeah, right? Because the half-life is like 2 hours on that. So people will smoke every hour or so.
You get 20 in a pack, so it's perfect.
Right. Somebody really thought about it. Because you got to sleep part of those days, right?
Sometimes you need a double dose.
Of sleep?
No, cigarettes.
Oh, okay.
That's why there's 20.
There you go. They're expensive too. Like I see the ads, I'm like pumping gas. I'm like, that's a habit I'm not going to start. Find me one of those free ones. Those are the habits that are the ones to start. So, hey, why do you need a cigarette in the morning? Because you've not been smoking in your sleep.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah, you can like burn your house down that way.
Don't take Ambien.
Huh?
Don't take Ambien.
Don't take Ambien and smoke at the same time.
No, don't take, yeah, okay.
What were you going to say?
When you take Ambien, you're not really, people don't know what they're doing.
They don't.
Like you like fried eggs and stuff.
Yeah.
I went to one of my clients the other day.
It happens.
They were fried.
Ambien, that's crazy stuff. What else you guys need to know about nicotine? I mean, it's obviously addictive. At some point, guess what it does, Jessica?
NCAA.
That's basketball.
Well, I'm never gonna forget it.
You're never going to remember it either. But, yeah, you're
I'll
probably
get to
never
it
going to
eventually. It's a multiple choice question.
If you're not a smoker and you take nicotine, it can cause things like tension, arousal, lightheadedness, dyspnea, makes you nauseous, which makes you wonder like how people become like, you know, because everybody was a non-smoker at some point in their life, right? I mean, that's the way it works. You don't fly out of the uterus with a pack of Marlboros. Jason, you thought that was funny for some. I'm just like imagining, you got this visual image now, right?
There's a lot of stupid commercials out there. I mean, I don't see why. Make a commercial like that, there we go.
Yeah. Good for the baby.
Save that for a Super Bowl ad.
Save that for a Super Bowl. Yeah. We should do that. With our drug sampler.
That's going on there too.
Yeah. Not a big deal. Don't worry about this stuff. I mean, you guys know. I didn't really want to talk too much about nicotine. There does seem to be like a high rate of smoking in folks with like ADHD and schizophrenia. There's some idea that maybe they're using the nicotine to medicate their cognitive impairment, right? Because it has some acetylcholine effects. So there you go.
So you said for cocaine, 10 to 15% of people actually get addicted to cocaine.
Yeah.
How many people get addicted to cigarettes?
I don't know. That's a good question. I honestly don't know.
Because you don't really hear about people dabbling in cigarettes.
You just, yeah, it's like, well.
I know this bitch who does. Like, I want one today, and then that's it for 5 months. It's fucked up.
Or like smoke when
My
they
mom.
drink.
Or, yeah.
Yeah,
That
but I
bitch.
feel like that usually leads to just much more
Cherry
long
stuff.
term all the time.
Yeah.
I like it, dabblers.
I
Dabblers.
know
You
dabblers.
And what?
Orange juice?
Like nicotine. Oh, yeah,
Oh.
actually, I forgot about that.
I have a picture of Jessica smoking a cigar with my fiance. It's framed in my bedroom. It's beautiful.
Is it actually?
No,
Okay.
but it's my favorite.
That was really
picture.
weird, wasn't it?
She's got like her drink and her cigar, and it's just so cute.
She's adorable.
It was on her Snapchat on my
It's
birthday.
your wedding day.
I know, it's whenever you're
Do you want a copy of it? So anyway, there are dabblers. Here's one.
I don't crave that.
I don't think that's I think that's like a one-time.
Yeah, that's
One.
like something that a lot of people dabble in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think cigars for some reason has some different sort of,
And more nicotine in them, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like,
Do you get the full
Well, you
effect if
puff
you don't know
it.
how
You're
to
not
do
like
it? Yeah.
inhaling it.
Don't know how to do it.
Well,
Uh,
I didn't want to say if I
Where
wasn't
you sit
inhaling
down
it because I know
and
that
you're
some of it probably got
You're
in
supposed to
there.
puff it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Does it do you get the full effect then? I'm like actually asking because I don't know.
You don't get as much. You go through
Yeah.
like the mucous membranes in
Bill
your
Clinton was
mouth
saying
and
that.
all your lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
See?
Not a big deal. Let's see. Although if you give rats and mice nicotine, they actually do better on like, like attention and working memory tasks, which is kind of interesting. So like all of the patients that you have that are like, if they have Alzheimer's, they should start smoking.
Really, what else do you have to
you're
lose?
gonna die anyway.
There you go, yeah.
I mean, at that point, right? I mean, you're just running down the edge of the sword. I mean, your feet are gonna get cut. I mean, you might as well do what you can. Let's be honest about it, right? Who's excited about that, right? There's a rat in a thing. You don't have to worry about this. Let's see. Females are more sensitive to nicotine reward and reinforcement in both rats and humans. That's kind of interesting.
There you go.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, right? Might explain some of the cigar use periodicity. I mean, because you typically think about males using cigars, right? And you don't think about that as like a continual use all the time. Jessica, there you go. There's the nucleus accumbens. Waiting on that. What?
She asked me what a cigarillo was.
Oh.
And it says cigar.
Why is it called something fancier?
It sounds cool.
Well, like real time. What are those? Okay. I mean, if I was gonna smoke them,
Cruella DeVille's coming.
I think that was the cigarette was still the same length, she just had the holder.
Oh, is that
Yeah, because if you want your hands to not be yellow, having a holder is a great thing
She's
to
got it
do.
all worked out.
Yeah.
You can carry on.
She makes it look cool.
Does that help?
Yeah, she does make it look
Yeah, smoking's cool.
cool. Smoking's
That's
cool.
why you asked why people continue and have an addiction.
Yeah.
Why it starts as children, because it looks cool. It's for peer
Yeah.
groups,
Peer groups.
environmental factors.
Peer
Aces.
groups. What are you gonna do with peer groups? What else do you need to know about, oh, now the computer froze. No, seriously, it did, I don't know why.
My mom told her doctor she likes to smoke in the summer because it's warm, but she won't smoke in the winter because she doesn't want to it's too cold. I mean, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And it is. She's like, smoke in the winter because she doesn't want to go outside because it's cold. She's a seasonal smoker. She's a weird bitch.
Why is this asking
Plus
me
it
to
is more relaxing to smoke
sign
in
in?
the summer.
Outside,
Outside,
by
have a
fire,
cocktail.
buckets,
Yeah.
no kids, it's kind of responsible.
Keeps the mosquitoes away.
Yeah. She's a seasonal smoker, or a stress smoker. She and Bruce got in a fight over Judge Cathinone. She went, ew, and she had one, then she's like, I'm good.
All right, folks, I don't know why this is not letting me back in, and, I mean, we've only got like 8 minutes left. So, yeah, I wasn't, it is very weird, and I didn't have a whole lot else I was gonna tell you anyway. Caffeine, we should talk for like 2 minutes about caffeine use, right? Because a lot of people use caffeine. It is addictive. The addiction is not like terribly strong, right? I mean, and the withdrawal lasts for about, well, not very long, right? How many of you have ever, anybody a habitual caffeine user? Yeah. And have you ever tried to like not use caffeine for a while?
Just a day.
Do you drink
What?
that on the weekends?
Headaches.
Every day.
Me too.
Every morning.
Yeah, you get headaches, you get other problems, but caffeine use is not really, we're not really worried about major problems with folks who are using caffeine, right?